it didn't happen all at once. There was no single clip, no dramatic headline, no moment that instantly declared Soo Kai and Tan Songyun as the topic everyone would be talking about. Instead, their connection grew quietly, almost patiently, until suddenly, it was everywhere. Viewers began sensing it before they could explain it. Something in the way Soo Kai listened when Tan Songyun spoke. Something in how Tan Songyun responded, not exaggerated, not performative, just naturally present. On screen, their chemistry didn't rely on grand gestures or dramatic lines. It lived in the pauses, in the way their eyes met and lingered just a fraction longer than expected, in how scenes felt warmer, heavier, more sincere when they shared the frame. What made it even more compelling was how effortless it seemed. Behind the scenes, that same energy carried over. Cast interviews revealed subtle dynamics fans couldn't stop dissecting. Soo Kai often deferred to Tan Songyun when questions became reflective, letting her finish her thoughts without interruption. Tan Songyun, in turn, spoke about teamwork and trust in ways that felt personal without ever crossing into oversharing. Neither tried to dominate the narrative. Neither tried to distance themselves from it either. Fans noticed how comfortable they were in each other's presence. Not loud, not overly familiar, just easy. Clips from promotional events began circulating, moments that weren't meant to be highlights. Soo Kai adjusting his pace to walk beside Tan Songyun. Tan Songyun turning instinctively toward him during group photos. The kind of behavior people don't rehearse because they don't realize they're doing it. Those moments fueled endless conversations online, not because they proved anything, but because they felt genuine. What truly pushed the connection into viral territory was the audience reaction. Viewers weren't just praising performances anymore. They were talking about atmosphere, about emotional realism, about how watching Soo Kai and Tan Songyun together made scenes feel lived in rather than acted. Many said it reminded them of why they fell in love with storytelling in the first place, because it felt honest. As discussions grew, expectations followed. Every new appearance, every interview, every shared frame was watched closely. Yet instead of buckling under pressure, Soo Kai and Tan Songyun remained steady. They didn't play into speculation. They didn't shut it down either. They simply continued being themselves, professional, composed, and quietly connected. That balance is what keeps the conversation alive, in an industry where chemistry is often manufactured. As the conversation continued to grow, one thing became increasingly clear. What people were responding to wasn't speculation, but consistency. Soo Kai and Tan Songyun didn't change the way they interacted once the spotlight intensified. They didn't suddenly become distant, nor did they lean into exaggerated closeness. They stayed exactly the same, and that steadiness only deepened public fascination. Fans began comparing early footage with more recent moments, expecting to find shifts or cracks. Instead, they found continuity. The same calm exchanges, the same mutual attentiveness, the same subtle rhythm between them that felt unforced and natural. It was as if their connection existed independently of the cameras, and the cameras were simply catching fragments of it. During longer interviews, Tan Songyun often spoke thoughtfully, choosing her words carefully. Soo Kai listened in a way that felt rare in public settings, not waiting for his turn to speak, not scanning the room, but fully present. When he did respond, his tone softened, as if he was matching her pace rather than leading the conversation. That kind of emotional alignment doesn't come from rehearsals. It comes from awareness. Another detail fans couldn't ignore was how protective the energy between them felt. Not possessive, not dramatic, just considerate. When Tan Songyun appeared tired, Soo Kai subtly adjusted the dynamic, letting others take the lead while staying close. When Soo Kai was under pressure, Tan Songyun remained steady, grounding the moment without drawing attention to herself. These weren't actions meant to be noticed, which is exactly why they were. Online discussions shifted again. Instead of chasing rumors, fans began sharing personal reflections. People talked about how watching Soo Kai and Tan Songyun made them feel calm, how their scenes felt comforting, how their interactions reminded them of relationships built on respect rather than intensity. The connection resonated not because it was exciting, but because it felt safe. That emotional response is what transformed casual viewers into invested observers. Industry insiders hinted, carefully, that working with both actors felt unusually balanced. There was no competition for attention, no tension over screen time, just cooperation. That atmosphere, they suggested, made everyone's work better, and audiences could sense it even if they didn't know why. Still, Soo Kai and Tan Songyun never offered explanations. They continued to let the work speak, to let moments pass without commentary, to allow people to feel without directing them what to think. And perhaps that's why the conversation hasn't faded. Because in a culture that demands clarity and instant answers, their connection exists in a quieter space. One built on mutual respect, emotional intelligence, and an understanding that not everything meaningful needs to be defined out loud. People keep watching not for confirmation, but for continuity. For the reassurance that something genuine can exist without being turned into spectacle. For the reminder that chemistry doesn't have to shout to be heard. And as long as Soo Kai and Tan Songyun continue to move with that same calm certainty, their connection will remain talked about, not as a rumor, but as a feeling audiences can't quite let go of. As time moved forward, the attention surrounding Soo Kai and Tan Songyun settled into something quieter but more lasting. It was no longer driven by sudden viral spikes or dramatic speculation. Instead, it became a steady presence in online conversations, the kind that resurfaces again and again because it feels unresolved, not in a frustrating way, but in a thoughtful one. People started noticing how their connection held up in ordinary moments. Not highlights, not promotional peaks, just routine appearances where nothing special was supposed to happen. And yet, something always did. In group settings, Soo Kai and Tan Songyun rarely positioned themselves at the center. They blended in, allowed others to speak, and followed the natural flow of conversation. But when they exchanged even the smallest look, it carried weight. Fans described it as recognition, the kind that says, "I see you," without needing to say anything at all. There was one instance often mentioned by viewers where Tan Songyun laughed at something off camera, a genuine, unguarded laugh that briefly broke her composed image. Soo Kai glanced over, smiling, not wide, not exaggerated, just soft. It wasn't a reaction meant for anyone else, and that's what made it memorable. He didn't perform it. He didn't share it. He simply had it in that moment. Moments like that began defining how people understood their connection. As more people tuned in, expectations could have easily distorted things. But Soo Kai and Tan Songyun seemed unaffected. Their professionalism remained intact. Their boundaries stayed clear. They didn't lean into narratives, nor did they push against them. They existed somewhere in between, where authenticity didn't need defending. Fans began to describe their dynamic using words like comfortable, balanced, and safe. Rare terms in an industry often fueled by intensity and spectacle. Some viewers even said watching them interact felt grounding, as if it reminded them that connection doesn't always have to be dramatic to be meaningful. That emotional resonance extended beyond fandom spaces. Casual viewers, people with no interest in speculation, started commenting on how natural their scenes felt, how believable their emotional exchanges were, how the atmosphere changed when they shared a frame. These reactions weren't about shipping. They were about storytelling that felt honest. And that's where the conversation deepened. People realized that what Soo Kai and Tan Songyun shared wasn't just chemistry, it was trust. Trust in timing. Trust in silence. Trust in each other's presence without needing reassurance. That kind of trust is difficult to fake and even harder to sustain under pressure. Still, no definitions came. No confirmations. No denials. Instead, there was continuity. The same respect. The same attentiveness. The same quiet alignment that had drawn people in from the beginning. And rather than growing impatient, many fans seemed grateful. Grateful that something could exist without being rushed. Without being labeled. Without being consumed. In a way, Soo Kai and Tan Songyun became a reminder that not all connections are meant to be explained, that some are meant to be felt over time, and that sometimes the most talked about stories are the ones that unfold slowly, leaving space for interpretation rather than demanding belief. That's why people are still watching, not for answers, but for moments, and for the feeling that whatever this is, it's real enough to matter. As the months went by, the story around Sukai and Tan Songyun didn't escalate the way many expected it to. There were no dramatic turns, no sudden shifts in behavior, no moment where everything tipped into something loud or undeniable. Instead, what unfolded was something far more unusual: endurance. Their connection didn't burn bright and disappear. It stayed. Each new appearance added another quiet layer, another small confirmation that whatever audiences were sensing wasn't imagined. It was simply subtle. And subtlety, in an industry built on spectacle, often lasts longer than noise. People began pointing out how neither of them ever looked uneasy standing beside the other. There was no stiffness, no exaggerated politeness, no awkward gaps that usually come with forced pairings. They stood naturally, moved naturally, and spoke naturally, as if sharing space had become second nature. What struck many viewers was how emotionally synchronized they seemed. When Tan Songyun spoke thoughtfully, Sukai mirrored that seriousness. When Sukai relaxed, Tan Songyun's posture softened too. It wasn't mimicry. It was alignment. The kind that happens when two people are genuinely paying attention to each other rather than to how they're being perceived. There was also a growing sense of mutual respect that fans admired deeply. Sukai never overshadowed Tan Songyun, even when the spotlight leaned toward him. Tan Songyun never diminished Sukai's presence, even when she was the one receiving praise. They allowed each other space to shine, which only made their shared moments feel stronger. Online, conversations matured. Fans stopped chasing proof and started celebrating presence. People shared clips not to dissect them, but to appreciate them. Comment sections filled with words like comforting, healthy, and grounded. That kind of language doesn't come from obsession. It comes from recognition. Recognition of something rare. Industry watchers noted how projects involving both actors carried a different tone. The working environment seemed calmer. The energy felt balanced. There was less tension, less ego, more collaboration. While no one said anything directly, the atmosphere spoke for itself. And perhaps most telling of all was what didn't happen. There were no scandals, no public corrections, no attempts to control the narrative. Sukai and Tan Songyun simply continued forward, focused on their work, respectful of their audience, and quietly consistent with each other. That consistency became the foundation of everything people were talking about. In the end, what makes their connection the most talked about topic online isn't mystery alone. It's maturity. It's the rare sight of two people navigating a tension without letting it define them. It's the understanding that not every meaningful bond needs to be named to be real. People keep watching because it feels honest, because it feels steady, because it feels like something worth noticing, even if it never asks to be explained. And as long as Sukai and Tan Songyun continue to move with that same quiet certainty, the conversation won't fade. It will simply keep growing, slowly, naturally, and on their own terms.